Hi, I'm Mally Shantzfeld, Editor-in-Chief of Orthodontic Practice US, a MedMark publication. Welcome to a live presentation and question and answer with Dr. Robert Waugh. In our webinar today, we will be exploring the effects that intraoral scanners have on orthodontic procedures and also the unique role that they play in patient satisfaction and retention. Before we get started, I would like to invite viewers to use the question box in your control panel to ask any questions. Your questions will be answered at the end of the session. Also, associated with this presentation is a free CE quiz. At the end of the webinar, we will email all attendees instructions on how to access the CE quiz. I'm pleased to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Robert Waugh. Dr. Waugh has practiced orthodontics full-time in Athens, Georgia since 1989 and is also an assistant professor at the Orthodontic Residency Program at the Dental College of Georgia at Augusta University. Dr. Waugh's interests include using new technologies that help deliver better care for his patients. In 2008, he merged 3 offices into one facility with 24 chairs that allows him to deliver care to using a wide variety of advanced modalities in hygiene, patient scheduling, treatment delivery, and more. Dr. Waugh, we turn the webinar over to you to learn more about our topic for today.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate that, and I want to go ahead and thank Carestream Dental for sponsoring this afternoon's presentation, as well as Orthodontic Practice US for being a host of our webinar. So I'm excited to be here. Of course, we're talking about the impact of intraoral scanners on the orthodontic practice, and I know there are lots of you out there that are potentially looking at using a scanner for the first time. I think we'll have lots of good information for you. In fact, if there's some of you out there looking for a second scanner or even looking to integrate it in different ways, know that I'll have some information for you. Hopefully we'll have a good time together. I know I have possibly lots of friends out there who I know, and hope you'll chime in and reiterate her desire to go ahead and have you make a list of your questions, try to get them in. I'll do my very best to answer them. I'm excited about intraoral scanning, and especially in our practice, it just fits, because from a technology standpoint, we like to be on the cutting edge, and I think we'll have some pearls to share with you here tonight. But the advent of scanning, I guess I got involved with scanning intraorally about in 2012 and went through, of course, the first generation of scanners. Now, of course, it's getting even better and better, and so we're actually able to show some neat things for you tonight. I hope they'll help you. When you take a look at tonight's agenda, we're going to cover a lot of area, but we're going to move quickly so we can get to the questions session. But first, we'll be covering a brief history of intraoral digital scanning, moving on to then practice workflow. So this is where I'll show you how the time savings are, and then we'll move to how to establish a relationship with a good digital lab and how we communicate for, of course, achieving good appliances that are fabricated, and we're going to show you how those appliances fit. And it's a highly accurate process, something I think you'll be pleased with. We'll move to then talking to your staff about the learning curve, how to integrate that. Then just everybody's always interested in the return on investment. How do you pay for your scanner? Does it save you money along the way? So I know we'll show you some tips there. Finishing up then with hygiene, patient safety, patient education, and case acceptance. So there's a pretty full agenda, but I look forward to covering each of those areas, and we'll move on now to our first area of interest, which is a very brief history of intraoral scanning. I think when you look at dental CAD/CAM studies and where this got its origin, it was in Europe, and of course it's in the 70s. It really wasn't until the miniaturization of these electronics put scanners into the hands of dentists in the early 2000s. And for orthodontists, this refinement of how to acquire whole arch scans for our purposes really wasn't until 2010. So we came on a little bit later in 2012 and then been rolling with this ever since. But that's a good brief overview. One fact, according to an informal survey by the JCO, the Journal of Clinical Orthodontics, is that 62% of respondents indicated they now use an intraoral scanner. So I'm assuming we've got the other roughly third of the orthodontists out there tonight, and look forward to hearing from you as you may have questions that we don't cover. I'll be glad to attend to those. So we're going to talk briefly then about workflow. And I want you to see a practice workflow that's really more of a traditional workflow for alginate or, in fact, PVS impressions. In this case, moving from left to right across the top, material preparation and inventory. This is where it starts. You've got to have the inventory. This is the cost of materials that otherwise you would not need if you had an intraoral scanner. The impression taking phase takes time, and it's a concern for impressions for your patients, and there's an anxious moment or two even for the staff in making sure that we got this correct on the first try. Bite registrations are taken, another material that could be removed from the equation if we had scanning, and then on to the lab process where first disinfection occurs, mixing then the plaster, pouring up the impression, waiting for the stone to dry, trimming the model, and arriving at the final trim model for the case. So if you take a look at the traditional workflow, it's labor intensive. There's a lot of materials, time, and labor, I guess, for the staff to do this in several days in the making before you have something that you can then send to the lab or show the patient. So that's the typical way for a traditional impression. Let's just talk for a minute about that moment when you take the impression for the patient. It's an anxious moment for a lot of people because they, are concerned about first breathing with this in, and then of course gagging with this in. So a couple of those impressions there that you see in the middle and maybe to the right of your screen are actually, I think they possibly got the epiglottis in that middle one, and I'm sure my staff would have probably trimmed that with a pair of scissors before they showed it to me. But that right there is a reason for sure to consider digital intraoral scans. Plus, we're going to get on to the cost of this, but keep in mind a remake of a conventional impression can result in a threefold increase in time and money. And that's, of course, the time it takes and time and materials it takes to take the first one, and then the second one, if that's what it takes, and then be thinking about what you could have been doing when you're taking the second run. You could have been doing a whole nother new patient. So impression. So that's a threefold increase in time and money, not just twofold. Most people think. One digital scanning tip to eliminate gagging. And with digital scanning, you can just move simply away from the gag trigger and return to these areas to finalize the scan. So it's easy to drop the scanner in, of course, remove it, and you're not held to the 30 seconds to a minute that it takes for the alginate or PVS to set. Take a look at this workflow. This compares now the traditional across the top in gray to a digital impression workflow, and you'll see where the steps are omitted now with the digital impression and where it saves you time. Working across the top on the conventional workflow, you would be, of course, doing the tray selection, the impression, disinfection, shipping it to the lab, report, and then you have your master cast. And so those are steps that are sometimes used in a restorative workflow and an orthodontic workflow as well. Only after those steps are done, the appliance can be fabricated. If you take a look at the digital workflow, this is going to save you time because once you acquire the hardware and software to do the scanning, it is out of your office by way of email and sent to the digital lab, and it becomes the ownership of the lab, which is what I like about it. And then we're moving on to then having the digital master model, from which all appliances can be made. If you can think of anything you can make in your office with an alginate impression or a PVS impression, that also can be made with a digital scan. So the tip and something to remember for later, the time savings comes from not having to prepare and to ship impressions and our models. This reduces your chair time and causes fewer disruptions in the office. So the workflow is something of the time savings for everyone. Let's move on to talking a little bit about the lab relationship. And I think it'd be smart to strike up a conversation with a good digital lab if you haven't done that already. These are usually some of the larger labs in the country, and they are handling the workflows of these, and it's growing exponentially in their labs. So get on the train and talk to the labs and figure out how the steps that you'll go to. One of the things I would recommend, is of course the practice can work with scanners and with labs that accept digital files. These could be the STL files, PLY, or DICOM files. I guess largely STL files, but the lab can communicate any of these unmet needs while the patient's still in the chair. So once you get the hang of scanning, this is not something you do every day, but let's say you had an assistant, for instance, that was not an experienced scanner, maybe somebody's on vacation, somebody stepped in to do the scans. Well, you could actually, while the patient's there, forward the scans to some of these labs, and they would in turn let you know that if there are any deficiencies in the scan. I'd always say it's what you see is what you get. So it's really not hard. If you spin it around and see the scans from different angles, you can tell if there's any omission or any deficiency in the scan. What this does, though, by emailing is this saves you some time. So you're at 5 to 8 days turnaround time with the labs instead of the 10 to 14 days you're used to. So when you think about scheduling, we're typically scheduled out historically 14 days or 2 weeks on most appliances just to keep it around numbers, but there's no reason why you couldn't get in the lab appliance in sooner. As we all know in orthodontics, the sooner we can get something in, the better chances of it's going to fit with teeth moving and with separation and things like that. So loose teeth are always changing. And so from that standpoint, I think it's a predictable way to go. One other hard fact to admit is that as many as 25% of the traditional impressions sent to labs are inadequate. So if you're taking Allergents and PVS, a lot of times those are rejected. And that's mostly due to a failure of following the guidelines. Lacking, then evaluating the impression, really just having the doctor look at the impression before you send those in. And so you could avoid the possibility of having to call your patient back in for another trip in and be somewhat embarrassed that, hey, we accepted that, but it wasn't accepted by the lab. So what you see again is what you get. I'd like to move on now to talking about the fit. And the fit of the final appliance is our goal. The advantages, I guess, in accuracy are that, of course, digital scanning has been proven to be more accurate than Allergen impressions. Orthodontic appliances require less data than scans made for the intricate restorative work, so that doing whole arch scans can be done predictably with more accuracy than you do with traditional impressions. I always thought that the day that intraoral scanning got to be as quick or quicker than taking an Allergen impression would be really the turning point for me in terms of being behind this. But it turns out there's so many more savings it doesn't require that. That for a lot of people is really what's happening. That's happening now. So if you aren't aware of it, you can take these scans in just literally minutes, a lot less time than it would typically take to prepare and take an impression traditionally. As to the fit, I want you to take a look at this trial fit of this modified TPA. This impacted canine case is something that required almost an emergency fit. So we got a quick turnaround from the lab, and this is the trial fit before cementation. You understand the lab is taking the scan, and they are then digitally separating the teeth. And so this is a step you may not know about. This is a tip for me. Ask your lab to digitally separate the teeth so you don't fit your own bands or crowns. You just ask them to digitally separate. So you scan them first, put the spacers in, and the lab anticipates this movement before they make the appliance. That way you got an accurate fit. So this is a close-up on the left of a model made prior to separation. Then this shows what can be done virtually in a lab setting to anticipate this millimeter or so space, so you can comfortably fit the appliance. The accuracy deliverables include really that scanners provide increased level of detail. This has to do with the teeth and the soft tissue. These are generally color, at least for the scanner that I chose to use in my practice here with Carestream has really been great for our practice. It's been something that we like to show patients as high tech. It's color accurate, and really it's the kind of thing that really we pay for the scanner once, and we don't have regular fees to pay on a monthly basis. So from our standpoint, those are things that were important to me when I went out to choose a scanner. So digital impressions, of course, lead to distortion-free models. That's fewer retakes, refits, appliances that fit more predictably. It's generally a higher quality treatment outcome. Patients, of course, are the winners there. Let's talk about the pros and cons with your staff. So developing a relationship with a digital scanner has its pros and cons. So let's work down the pros list, and I'll help explain. Scanners help eliminate most of your consumables. These are all the things of course, materials and things you throw away, disposables, and these are things you have to pay for on a regular basis every month. So with a scanner, of course, you can eliminate a lot of that. Intuitive software shortens your learning curves, and so this has come a long way from first-generation scanners where it would take weeks to train people. Now you take about 5 scans in a row, you'll have it down pat. Digital models allow you to easily communicate with the lab or referring dentist, so you could basically take this and move it to different locations and get opinions, and this is how it's being done. So new technology then demonstrates the practice's dedication to the latest techniques. For instance, I know in our practice we're excited about the opportunity to simulate treatment with some of these scans. Moving to the cons list, I guess you have to consider that any new technology in your practice could be a disruptor to practice workflow, and that goes for digital scanning at first. The first few scans may need to be repeated. Obviously, that might be something that costs you a little bit of time on the front end, but certainly well worth it. Going digital means changing your whole mindset. Instead of running to grab the alginate, you've got to schedule and have somebody capable of scanning and have them available at a moment's notice. So it can be some expense at the upstart, but then you win out, as we'll soon see, with the return on investment for overall. If you asked me today, you said, Bob, is it worth it to do this digital scanning? Is it time to step in and get started? I would say absolutely. In our office, we sort of relate it to what happened with digital radiography, when it became a no-brainer to get rid of your processor, your film, all the cleaning of the rollers and things like that. And you could take a take a radiography scan or an image, and then you could instantly upload it into your workflow. That is a time saver. So something that saves the patient time, saves you chair time, and we're all winners there. So it's obviously much better than the first generation. The learning curve is shortened. Another tip for digital scanning is that with the scanner, at least the one I'm using, it has a side-oriented scanning wand. And so you could shoot from 90 degrees or at another 90-degree rotation. So this improves your ability to access difficult areas, such as in the posterior. Let's say the patient had a limited opening and shorter height is achieved with that at a 90-degree angle, and better access to molars. So side-oriented scanning is something to look for when you're shopping for a scanner. So let's talk about return on investment, the bottom line. So really it comes down to, you could probably pay for your scanner with just the cost of impression materials. Just consider right now how many impressions you're taking with either traditional alginate or PBS. And just know you could save $1,500 to $2,000 each month on traditional impression materials if you have a good-sized practice that moves through a bunch of impressions each day. Compare the cost, and let's get an example going by just amortizing the cost of the materials over the amortization of the investment you make in the scanner. Looking first at traditional impressions, if you have 600 starts or 600 cases that you're going to take before and after models on, well, that's 1,200 sets of models or 2,400 impressions. Now, in a year, that's a busy year. That's a lot of material. 1,200 impression sets could be up to $25 per set in PBS, probably maybe half of that in alginate. So if you were using PBS for all of that, you could consider $30,000, maybe $15,000 to $30,000 considering alginate and PBS per year. So then what do you spend on a scanner? Maybe potentially it costs a scanner somewhere upwards of $30,000 to $35,000. If you consider $30,000, well, amortize that over 5 years. That's $6,000 per year versus $30,000 a year in impression material. So it doesn't take long, and it's not a lot of hard math to figure out that this is going to pay for itself. Financing it over time or buying it outright, you're going to make the return on investment. The other hidden costs of storing stone models really have to do with just medical legally you're required to keep something there for the time of duration. If some of you have gotten away from taking models, it's an opportunity to get models stored and be in line with what's considered the standard of care. Depending on the state, you have to keep models a certain number of years. So this could be as easy as deleting a file if you had digital scanning, but otherwise you've got to store these things. And I've been there. I've stored these, and we recently had to take a document destruction company back and take about 10,000 stone models and grind them because it's a medical record. So think of the savings there. But Models can be digitized by a third party. This could cost you $10, $30 a piece. Why don't you just do it yourself with one digital intraoral scan, one on the front end, one on the tail end of treatment. So if you invest in a desktop model scanner, this takes up room on the counter. Just use your regular intraoral scanners to do this yourself. When we look at scanners and eliminating the need for stone models, it's a big time saver, but better than that, you can use these intraoral digital scans for diagnostic purposes. So advanced software can take measurements on the patient's dentition. We do Bolton's analysis, arch length analysis. You can look at overbite, overjet measurements, display pressure from a occlusogram, basically, on these models, scanning them into, what you can look at it from all three planes of space. And I've heard patients are especially convinced when you can spin this model around and show it from the lingual, from the tonsils looking out, and showing how the bite impinges on the palate. This is, for most patients, a reason to get started with treatment. So automatically you can add a virtual base. This of course completes your model and looks like an American Board of Orthodontic standard base. And so this is top quality, top efficiency, and something that you can carry the case forward very easily, predictably, in record time. We're going to move on to talking about hygiene and patient safety. I wanted you to know that maintaining the aseptic field has always been our goal, and it's on the top of my mind when we treat patients. We love to tear open the packaging in front of the patient when we have scanner tips. By the way, one of the reasons I chose the scanner I have is because it's an autoclavable tip. And so this happens to be a recommendation from the CDC, so not just from me, but the Centers of Disease Control recommend heat-tolerant semi-critical items in dentistry that come in contact with mucous membrane should be sterilized using heat. So there are very few on the market that do this, but something you should look into in shopping for a scan. In terms of case acceptance, it's always a pleasure of mine to just watch the patient's reaction when they, for the wow factor, we call it the wow factor, when they walk through on the new patient tour, they're seeing three-dimensional scans taken in our scanning bay, and we're doing this prior to the exams and even after following the exam if certain appliances aren't predictably made otherwise. So digital tools can convey technological competence, and that's really the bottom line for the patient. When they see this, they say, hey, I'm in the hands of a competent practitioner, somebody I trust to treat my child. And that goes a long way for cementing that process for us. Impressing new patients, scanning is more comfortable. We say, of course, we have the scanner, and they see this, and they like that a lot better than traditional impressions, and this is a win-win for us. Images produced by the scanner also help patients and parents understand the treatment. So they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so for us, being able to show and work through different views taken from a digital scan is a real positive experience. It's presentation ready. The scanning is complete. No need to call the patient back for another appointment. So a lot better, I think, case acceptance when it comes down to acquiring these scans and convincing patients that you're a competent practitioner ready to start. So with that being said, I think I want to throw my email up and, of course, offer you a personal invitation to write questions afterwards. But I think we're in position now to take a few questions.
Hi, Dr. Waugh. Thank you very much for that really informative presentation. Before I get to my questions, I'd like to invite viewers to use the question box in the control panel to ask any questions that you have for Dr. Waugh. One question that we have are what are your tips for scanning difficult bites?
Well, we're always going to have challenges. Some patients can open wider than others, and of course, scanning in the posterior are things that you want to consider. Let's say an anterior open bite case, something where a patient has a limited range of opening, you have to get to the back. That's a pretty good challenge, but we found that it's possible when you get in, have patients move to one side. You can use this a lot of the times like you would typically bond second molars and have the patient move, and you can insert and remove the tips. Of course, using a side-oriented view, also a good opportunity. I think, bite records. Bite records are also sometimes a question when the patient has an open bite. We've not had a problem taking those scans when you can capture those teeth in a good view. I think class 2 correction, when you're seeing large overjets, sometimes those can be a challenge when you can't get, for instance, the upper anterior teeth, lower anterior teeth in the view. In those cases, we're taking this, let's say instead of triangulating the bite with a 2 posterior and 1 anterior scan, we'll take maybe 2 left and 2 right, and usually get those down without the front teeth, and we can get a good bite registration. So class 2s, open bites, the bite records for those cases are probably the most challenging.
Okay. Can scanners be used for sleep appliances?
Absolutely. We've have in our practice, we've been doing sleep apnea and sleep appliances. We use a TAP 3 appliance, and it certainly can be done. I would say that a lot of the orthodontists are moving this direction. This is a natural fit for us in our practices. So we take those a lot of times using a George gauge, if you're familiar with that. This is an anterior bite record, and you're looking to have the appliance fabricated in a more forward position, maybe edge to edge or better. We usually, using this George gauge, we can capture the side views again. We can trim off the posterior part of the George gauge if we need to, catch just the anterior jig, and get the posterior scanned in with, again, 2 left, 2 right views to get the bite scanned in. So definitely appliances can be made. I think you have to check with your labs to see if how they require the bite record. You can certainly mail it in, but we prefer to scan it and email it.
Okay. How do you care for special needs patients with the scanner?
Well, special needs patients, this is a perfect opportunity for special need patients because it's simpler than traditional impressions. We're not worried about the airway, number one, or blocking the airway with material. And so there's no race here. With a special needs patient, just schedule for a little bit more time. Take your time working your way in and around to the arches to get them scanned. One nice thing is if you miss a certain area or if it's difficult to get, you can always come in and refine it, and then you can always add to it, which it otherwise means another impression. So where you'd wear the patient out. But this is a pretty simple process. Special needs patients, a lot of those treated with liners and otherwise. So it's a really good opportunity to see these patients and take care of them.
How has the transition been to digital records?
Well, I mentioned earlier, it's been no problem for us. We like technology. We embrace new technology. I think it could be a challenge for anybody who's this is their first attempt, but we have to move as things move, and so for us, acquiring this technology was simple. It was inexpensive, and compared to the number of impressions we would have otherwise made, so it was a no-brainer for us to get involved. Knowing that now our lab is clean, we don't have to have all the stone, the model grinding, the noise, and the dust, and all of this, and the time it takes to send things out. The staff tend to embrace that. I think we have our main people that scan, so from that standpoint, we've been able to manage that. I think the scanning, the training has gotten so much simpler now because the algorithms are built to manage good training, and so it's a much easier process now. Getting into it now is simpler than when we did it, but it's so simple. It's really for us, like again, digital radiography is just something that's a no-brainer.
You did address patients' reactions, but can you tell me a little bit more about your patients' reactions to the technology?
Well, it's a culture thing with our practice, but patients are impressed. And you want to show this off. So for instance, in our scanning area, we have our monitors linked to a large screen TV. So if you happen to be walking by, you're going to see the same thing the scanning technician would see. And you're just going to see it from a distance on a large screen. And so this happens to be on our new patient tour. We make a point of stopping, and if, for instance, there's not an active scan being done, there's one left up on the screen. And it's interactive, and it's just a fun thing to talk about. Now we're integrating this into our new patient process because the scanning times are down so quick that we can actually do this just like we traditionally took pictures, x-rays on the way in. we can now do this with an intraoral scan. So we're looking at the possibilities there for improved case acceptance, and again, a nice wow factor for the patients.
Okay, and my last question, what are the biggest changes you see in orthodontics in the next few years?
Well, I just touched on that, but I think because of the scan times are getting down, and we're seeing this is getting quicker and quicker, easier to train. It's not going to be unusual to either have a portable scanner like the one we're using, moving chair to chair, or possibly having dedicated stations. In our practice right now, we're already having a 3-chair bay for scanning, and then we're looking at the possibility of then porting this into the new patient exam. Working that through the new patient workflows are really just something that's exciting to me, because it just means a simpler process, and the patient you can discuss treatment and say, okay, well, we walk right outside and put the spacers in, ready to insert those appliances next time, and they're done. So it really fits into a faster workflow. I think we're going to see this get better and better. We're already integrating digital printing in our office. The walls coming down for letting us do some of these reset retainers in-house, and handling simpler things, how to do hybrid treatment. Hybrid treatment is a big buzzword right now, and doing a combination of braces and aligners to finish cases that are otherwise more challenging to finish in longer times with braces alone. And so I think you're going to see a lot of neat changes coming down the pike. This is a really good time to be investing in a scanner, and so that you can take advantage of all of that new technology.
That's all the questions that I see for now. So I wanted to thank everyone for your questions, and we have run out of time, so if we did not get to your question, we'll answer it via email after the webinar. Please be sure to take a free CE quiz associated with the webinar. We will be sending you a recording of this presentation and instructions on how to access the CE quiz. Thank you all again for attending, and a special thank you to Dr. Waugh for a great and informative seminar, and to our sponsor for this webinar, Carestream Dental. Thank you, and have a good evening.